so
ego.
Beyonce, used to struggle a lot with like confidence and all of that. So she crafted an alter ego called Sasha Fierce. Every time when she wanted just to be like full out on stage, and she would tap into Sasha Fierce.
That's interesting.
So it wasn't her. Yeah.
I wonder if people who do that struggle to operate in the real world.
Yeah. I wonder.
Like one of my favorite things that people say to me when they meet me at events and stuff is, "You're exactly like you are on your podcast and on Instagram." Like, well, I don't know how to be somebody else.
Yeah.
But I can see the alter ego thing having value, because there are things that I've given up in my life because I don't have the capacity to actually do them the way they need to be done in a moment. Mm-hmm. Like I gave up sports for 10 years because I was like, I don't have an off switch when it's competitive.
Yeah. Are we recording?
We're recording. We don't have to use it if you don't want to use this, but
yeah, he talks a little bit about kids too, right? Right, kids are always playing make believe.
Yep.
Right, and they're like pretending to be superheroes and all of these other different characters, and they're like tapping into like their strength, right? So it's a level of modeling a different type of strength. I think so. I think it is for sure powerful for athletes.
Have you ever used it?
Huh?
Have you ever used it?
I don't think I have like a character per se. Like some people like will have like the name, the character and all of that, but I feel like I definitely have like the like versions of myself that I can step into, and sometimes like music and different things like that help for sure, that I can really step into. Yeah, it is a little bit like an alter ego.
What's your go-to music?
Go-to music?
Yeah.
For that?
Yeah.
I mean, it shifts and changes, but it's, I'd have to play some to you.
What's that?
I'd have to play some of the music for you.
Why? Because it's hard to describe?
Huh? Yeah, I mean, it's just very, hard to describe.
Okay. So it's not like a typical rap, hip hop, rock, country. It's not one of those.
No.
Okay.
A little bit more, I'd say, on the rock side.
Okay.
Have you heard of Alan Raymond before?
No.
Maybe his stuff?
No.
Yeah.
Should I be listening to him?
He's good.
Alan Raymond.
Alan Raymond.
All right.
Yeah.
I need to let's mark that. We're going to come back and check that spot on the podcast. I love finding new music. My uncle used to own a record label, and he would get all these bands every year would send in their application to be featured on his album. Like every year he did one album that was 13 different songs from bands that you never heard of before, when the idea was to get them out into the public so people could find these bands. And I used to love finding new music that way. So I'm going to look up Alan Raymond and we'll see what it's all about.
It's like just like the kick I'm on right now. I forget who posted it on social media, but he's another functional medicine expert, and he talked a lot about like the music that you listen to is, some type of emotional expression that your body is craving for. So like if you're listening a lot to sad music, or you're listening a lot to like, rock that has a bit of anger behind it, there's usually some kind of emotion that wants to be expressed through the body, but music is a form of that expression. So, and I think it does allow us to tap into, right, that emotional energy as well.
That's an interesting thought, because what I find is, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I like to listen to all different musics in the same day. Like I struggle with
to change your state probably to different moods, right?
Yes, and just because I get tired of one. So like the day that my wife gave birth recently, we went into the hospital with a speaker. Like she brought the whole freaking house. Everything came with us. But we were just listening to different music the whole time. And it became like, okay, enough Chris Stapleton. He's great. We love him. Let's move on to somebody else. And there was some hip hop, and then there was some blues, and it was just because we wanted the variety.
Yeah. Interesting.
Do you find that your mood gets set from the music or for the music?
I usually will choose my music based off of what kind of state I want to be in. So like in the morning, I tend to listen to more like meditative type music. And then as I go into my workout, so like a lot of like the Alan Raymond type playlist, like very upbeat, but that type of music, I guess a good way to describe it is very like stepping into your power. Like there's that type of energy in it. There's a little bit of like sensuality type power intertwined with it. And then during the day, sometimes it's more, it can be more like joyful playful type music, and then in the evening time, I'm usually like back to my meditation music. So it's like I'm using the music to cue what kind of state I want to be in.
I can relate to that. I think talking about the birth experience was probably the wrong way to describe what an average day looks like, because there was nothing to be done except be in this room and wait for a baby to come. Yeah, I can see that. Like, I made a rule that I don't listen to podcasts in the morning anymore because they crush my ability to be creative throughout the day because I'm listening to other people's creativity.
Well, yeah. And also too, if you think about that, is like you are very much in more of like a logical state of what you're tapping into. And so much of creativity is very emotional. And you actually can't be in a process usually of a lot of doing. Like for me, if I get into a lot of like work and doing in the morning, like I kill a lot of my creativity. And I think one of the biggest lessons that I found is like, you can't force creativity, and it comes in this space of just being. Like I would imagine most of the times, like when you're creative, it's like when you're in a workout, you're in some kind of a flow, you're outside going for a walk, you're I don't know, meditating or whatever it is, you're just relaxing, and then all of a sudden you're like, ooh, and you like have that type of creativity that more so comes to you. And I think that's like the hardest part, because as entrepreneurs, we're like, all right, I want to tap into that creativity, and then it does the exact opposite.
Yeah, I've heard that's what you're describing. I forget what the name of it is, but there's a combination of things that lead to creative thought, and it's being able to do something that you've done a million times. So there's an automatic
flow.
There's that, yes. And then the comfort and safety at the same time. So like being in the shower, driving a car, all those kinds of things are where I've heard, at least, it drives creativity.
And where is your nervous system at? Where is your emotions at too, right? It's really hard to be creative when you're tired, you're fatigued. It's really hard to be creative when like you're in a bad mood or any of that is really happening. I know for me, most of the time I'm in a meditation in the morning. I've just gotten a good night of sleep, and I'm just sort of like sitting with myself. I got some good music on. I'm focusing on usually like gratitude in the morning, or like a little bit of visualization, and all of a sudden these things just start coming to me of like what I want to create and build. And yeah.
Do you take a long time after you've had an idea to decide to act on it? Or are you an idea, try it, fail at it, or succeed at it, and then see what happens?
That's an interesting question. I have an idea. I have to write it down of what those ideas are. So you should see the notes in my phone. They're just loads of different things. Now, I used to be immediate action on all of these ideas. Now that I have basically 3 businesses, my team would kill me if everything that I just came up with, I'm like, we're going to do this and this and this. So I've actually had to learn to say like, okay, these are some ideas, and maybe I'll bring some of them to my team. Some of them will implement, some of them will just like kind of hold on to for later. And then sometimes we're like, okay, we maybe don't need to do this. This isn't what we should be focusing on. But I mean, early on, and I think any type of visionary, right? You just come up with these ideas, but that's kicked me in the butt so many times, because it's kind of why I have 3 businesses now, because what happened to me is I had so many of these different ideas. I'm like, oh, I want to do this and this, and I created them all, and I'm like, ooh, now there's a lot that I have to do, which is now actually pulling me away from a bit of that creativity even.
I had a very similar experience. Like very, very similar. I ended up building effectively 3 different businesses. One that services the end user, one that services the coach, and one that services the gym owner. And I was like, oh, okay, how did we get here?
All great ideas.
Yeah.
But then you're like, yay, exactly. Visionary.
Yes. And then a mentor of mine shared with me that when I bring ideas to the team, it's like the boss gets up from their office and walks down the hallway, and everybody, if we were in the same room, in the same building, would hide, hoping that I wasn't walking into their room, because they were working on something and I was about to blow it up, even if it was just an idea. So we had to put in place several different shields from the team to be protected from me.
Yeah.
We got Slack instead of email and text.
Yeah, we use that.
Right. We put a team member who I'm only allowed to put ideas on one team member in the company.
And then they're like, yes or no.
And then they ask me all the questions necessary to identify if we should actually do this or not.
Yeah.
And if we should, she brings it to the team and says, this is how we're going to do it. I get to point, like, we're going to go to that beach over there. And then when everyone says, how are we going to get there? Why are we going? I can tell you why we're going, but Mary's going to tell you how we're going to get there.
And then they'll ask all the questions of like, what about these things that we're working on? Which one's more important? And then you're like, okay, maybe this is something, but not right now. So
And, yes.
we have a long list of like next quarter and this year, but not right now type ideas.
So how do you decide? How do you decide what goes now and what doesn't go now?
I think you have to know what the core needle movers are, right? That you need to be focusing on in your business. I mean, we're visionaries at the end of the day. We're going to always come up with ideas, and something I actually had to learn about myself. And early on in my personal development journey, I learned that I could do anything that I would set my mind to. Like I could achieve anything, I could create anything, and it was such a sense of power. So I did everything, and I created anything. And now I'm at such a different place in my journey where also I'm saying, even though I can, doesn't mean that I should. And I think that's the evolution, right? Because oftentimes people will struggle with that self-doubt of like, I don't believe that I actually could do it, right? And you get to that level of like, if I harness enough discipline, if I really go all in on this thing, like I know I can create it. But the question is, right, should I?
Right. What's the thing that you've created that you're most proud of?
My practice, I think. Rachel Scheer nutrition. I just losing my health and almost having my large intestine removed. It was such a obvious thing to create for me at the time. And all of my businesses kind of have operated in that way. Wasn't like, all right, I want to create a business. What should I create? What should my offer be? Right? And that's how a lot of people operate, right? Because entrepreneurship is sexy, right? And everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, and not everybody should be an entrepreneur. But I went through all of my health issues, and at the end of it, of having to heal myself through functional medicine, and then really realizing what was missing with Western medicine, the fitness industry, and the big gap that was there, and what someone really needs in order to heal in terms of coaching and testing and all of these different areas. You know, it was just like such an obvious answer of, I want to create what I wish that I had, and I want to help other people in this way. So I think that for me, it was just taking so much of what I walked through and turning it outward. And, you know, I think when you have that type of belief too about what it is that you're doing, like it's gonna be successful, right? Versus I need to come out with a business. Like if that's the thought process, it's probably not going to be successful.
Well, the difference that you're describing there is the person who thinks about like, oh, what could we add to this to generate more profit?
Yeah.
Which is a fine thing to do, like make money in your business. But you're describing having a really strong purpose as the through line. And so whatever we do has to serve this purpose.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't serve this purpose, we don't do it. And if it does serve this purpose, we figure out how to do it well. That alleviates you from having to think about what do we do to generate more money, because the next thing happens because it's supposed to. Does that make sense?
Yes. What I think we're truly missing right now is the heart. I think a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs and people online and social media, who everybody wants to be successful, is we are missing the heart as to why you are doing what you're doing, right? If you have to ask of like, what is my offer? What should I be doing? Again, I'm like, your heart, like you should know, like, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I believe in. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I'm going to help people with. Like you have that knowing, and then you bring that to the world versus like, again, the opposite. And I think people can really tell the difference. And I think right now, since social media is also such a big place for growing your business. Like I grew my business through social media. People can really tell the difference from the people who are just putting out content in order to bring people into their business versus there is a very different energy when you put something out there and you are like, I believe in this and this value that I want to bring. It's very different energetically. And I think people are craving more of that heart in a lot of the messages that are being put out there.
I'd like to get to the core of that for you, like what you're doing.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you built what you wish you had. How would you describe what you wish you had?
I wish that I had someone who genuinely got to get to know me and what was truly happening in Rachel's life, because I was dealing with all of these chronic health issues, right? And I think most of the population is struggling with these chronic health issues, right? They're struggling with gut issues. They're struggling with depression, anxiety. They're struggling with chronic fatigue. I think most people are dealing with these chronic health issues that Western medicine really isn't a help for. And, for me, my issues got so severe. I ended up going from physician to physician. I was passed around from specialist to specialist. I was put on 5+ medications to manage symptoms of inability to use the restroom. So laxatives for that. It got so bad. I had to do an enema actually at one point because of the dysmotility in my gut. I was put on an antidepressant. I was put on thyroid medication. I was put on birth control.
Birth control? Okay.
Yeah. Hormonal imbalances, right? Treat the acne that you have.
Right. So it became like a stacking of this causes this problem. So let's take this.
And it wasn't like all at once. It wasn't like one physician was like, here's all this medication, right? And actually that's what's super unfortunate. Like I've actually had a few clients who come into our practice and we'll look at their medication list and they're struggling so much with these chronic health issues. And we're like, holy shit, no wonder you feel all of this way. There's all of these medications are interacting with each other, and then they're taking something because of the symptom, right, of the medication that's trying to help decrease anxiety, then help them sleep at night, and then they need energy, so then they're on Adderall, and they're like, it's all of these things that are like you're treating because of the medication, but we're not actually getting to the underlying cause. But without going on a whole rant about all of that,
well, why not go on a rant about it?
We can go there. We can totally go there. I mean, I always wanted to really ask the question, do medications actually have side effects, or do they just have effects that we don't market?
Right.
When you start to think about it in that way, it becomes scary. And I'm not against medication at all, right? I've taken medication, and I actually think for a lot of people, to get them out of a very severe place in their health, and for many people who are really struggling with these chronic health issues, anxiety, depression, to help them get to a certain point where they actually can work on themselves, 100%. I'm all for it. But what I'm not for is not actually addressing the true root cause and utilizing all of these medications that are interacting with each other, that are creating more issues, and someone continuing to get worse and worse and worse. And that's where I was. I continued to get worse and worse. I even went to the Mayo Clinic. I did all their scans. I did their genetic testing, which I did learn. I had something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is hypermobility. I don't know if you've heard of that before, which I found out later could have been playing a bit of a role in why I developed SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, because it is a bit of a motility disorder, but it still wasn't like, okay, this is what's really going on with you. And that's why after, my health really suffering, and the big issue for me became the motility issues that I had in my gut, that I was sent to a colorectal surgeon who actually wanted to cut out my entire large intestine at that point, because it's not sexy to talk about, but I couldn't use the restroom like at all anymore. Like the motility was that compromised in my gut. And I remember this physician saying, this is probably something that you've had for most of your life. You could have something called a floppy colon, because I did some different scans, and there was definitely some things that were like my intestines like moving around, I guess, a bit. And so he just thought it was a structural issue. So the solution was, okay, if we're struggling with a motility issue, if we cut out the entire large intestine and we sew the small intestine to the rectum, or maybe for a while I have an ostomy bag, then, we'll fix a lot of the motility issues. Well, I'd probably be running to the restroom multiple times per day, not to mention I don't even want to think about where my quality of life would be. And yes, you can survive, you can live without a large intestine 100%, but you're not going to probably be optimal it comes to health for
Well,
sure.
a large intestine is no appendix. So can you share with people who don't know what the large intestine does and what you would have been missing had it been removed?
Yeah, I mean, the large intestine is also called our colon. Actually, most of the bacteria that we have is housed in the large intestine. We do have some that is housed in the small intestine, but a lot of the microbiome that we talk about is housed in the large intestine. And we know that the bacteria in our gut play a role in literally every system in our entire body. It plays a role massively in our mental health. So 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. 50% of dopamine is produced from that in the gut. And so a lot of our gut-brain connection is all created through the health of our microbiome, immune system. 70% of our immune system is housed in our microbiome. So for people who have autoimmune conditions or allergies, usually all of that comes back to the gut. But not even just that. I mean, a lot of our hydration, electrolyte balance is crucial with the role of the large intestine. And then even a bit of some nutrient absorption. However, most of that does take place in the small intestine. So that's where you can survive without the large intestine. But I mean, you're going to be running to the restroom multiple times per day, hydration, electrolyte issues. And then, we look at how are you going to feel with pulling out a portion where a lot of your microbiome is housed.
Right. When you say gut, what comprises the gut?
The gut, right? So we have the gut microbiome, and then we have the gut lining, so more of like the structural side of it, right? So the microbiome and there's a lot of different studies on it of how much bacteria, but there's trillions of these microorganisms that are living inside of us. It is a symbiotic relationship. So we feed the bacteria in our gut, they thrive, and then they actually benefit us. They synthesize different key vitamins. They actually play a huge role in our hormones, as I mentioned, mental health, immune system. So we benefit each other. And then also, when we're talking about the gut, we can look at it more structurally. So we have the gut lining, which is one cell layer thick. And this is really important because it's semi-permeable, so it allows for electrolytes, allows for water to actually, go from the inside of our intestines. And if you think about the inside of our intestines, it's not actually in our body. So everything that we eat, you can think of it as a hollow tube going from the mouth all the way to the anus. So it's essentially outside of the body when you're taking in food.
I see.
So and so we have the gut lining that allows for certain things to flow through into the bloodstream to absorb different types of nutrients. But actually, when the gut lining is damaged, we can develop, a greater level of intestinal permeability. Layman's terms, we call that a leaky gut, where now we get bacteria, foods, and toxins leaking into the bloodstream, which triggers a massive immune inflammatory response. Hello, food sensitivities. Hello, immune issues. A lot of skin issues tend to come up. So eczema, rosacea, all of those are symptoms of having intestinal permeability. Brain fog, actually, number one symptom of a leaky gut. But if left untreated, it actually can lead to the onset of an autoimmune condition. So that's where most autoimmune conditions are really going back to the gut, healing the gut lining, and addressing the microbiome, because the immune system and inflammatory component that the bacteria play a role in.
A few things. One, you're an outstanding speaker. I don't know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You articulate very well. You're very clear, and it's obvious that you have a lot of knowledge. So I just wanted to call attention to that because it's. I imagine it's a skill that you've worked on.
I wasn't always that way.
I believe that. That's whenever people do something really well, something that I've decided to start doing is acknowledging it, because oftentimes I think to the audience or to people who are watching from the outside, it's, I wish I could naturally be like that. And that dismisses all of the work that I imagine you had to do to become that articulate. And so I wanted to just call attention to it.
Thank you. Actually, speaking was something I really struggled with when I was younger.
How'd you get better?
I was incredibly shy. I was actually almost, I wouldn't say like mute, but like in school, I would not talk to anybody. I was the cute girl, right? So these guys would ask me out, and then I'd go on a date with them even, and then I wouldn't talk to them. I would go on the date and I'd be so shy, and then eventually they'd break up with me because they're like, this girl doesn't talk. She never talks, right? And that was a lot of my own internal, stuff that I was struggling with, a lot of like my upbringing where I learned that it wasn't safe to fully be myself around other people. And often we think of safety as just I'm physically safe, but it's also the psychological safety, which means feeling safe to be able to express the fullness of one's emotions, authenticity without fear of judgment or rejection. And I remember the first time someone explained that to me, and I'm like, that's what I struggled with my entire life. That's why I struggled with speaking. That's why, I was the little girl in the back of the classroom who had raised my hand like this. Like I was that like very, very shy girl. And so now, right, you look at me and you're like, okay, public speaking and podcasting and all of that. But it was the scariest thing ever for me to do. But also because it was something that I was on the opposite side, that I was not good at, that actually I almost had like, I guess you could say like a deficit in, was why I felt so called to lean into this area in my life, right? And I feel like that's often for a lot of people who end up becoming successful in a certain area, right? You hear their stories and they were like, this was something I actually was like awful at. So I probably wouldn't have put so much effort and emphasis into not only speaking, but even for me at the beginning, speaking was a lot of performance. So that was something I had to work through. So the first level of safety that I got, because I remember my first public speaking that I ever did, it was in a gym. But after that, so my second one was actually in front of 500 people. So it was like second speaking event, and I memorized every last word I was going to say for this speaking event. I was 25 years old, and I was deathly afraid, like leading up to this. And like, I'm going to mess this all up. So I literally practice because I was a dancer and I was a gymnast. I'm like, it's like a routine, right? Mm-hmm. So I had everything, and it came from my heart what I wanted to say, but it was still a performance at the end of the day. So that was the first level I was able to get to. And then as I've continued to do a lot of my own inner work and my own healing, that's where it really comes back to that psychological safety. And I learned how much that I really struggled to feel safe, and I really struggled to fully be myself. Mm-hmm. I really struggled to fully be all of Rachel, right? That's what was happening when I was younger. That's what was happening in this. And there was a lack of trust in myself in a lot of ways. And also fear of if I come and I bring this version of Rachel and it's not fully all of Rachel and that is rejected or judged, okay, like that would suck. That would hurt. But it wasn't really fully all of me. But now if I bring all of me, all of Rachel, I am fully authentically myself, my weird, my goofy self, all of me, and I bring that, and that's not accepted, fuck. That hurts, right? And so I had to really sit with that and lean into that. And of course, like, we still have those things that come up, right? And it's like we can say all we want, like, oh, I don't care what anybody thinks of me. It's like bullshit, mm-hmm. Right? Bullshit. Like we all care what other people think. But where I'm at right now in my journey is I have learned that, me sacrificing and me not allowing the fullness of all of Rachel to come in is really the greatest betrayal. Like I judge myself and I reject myself before other people, I even give them the opportunity to. So what actually matters more is me stepping into this, being fully all of me and accepting myself. And that's where I really realized like that was the power. I had to accept me. I had to bring all of me first, because what was actually happening is I was rejecting me.
I love that. We have a lot of commonality there. Mm-hmm. Opposites, actually. If I can share a story with you briefly. Yeah. So that I found myself back in like 2015, 16, working 80, 90 hour weeks, and not making any money at all. Like $30,000 a year, owning an event company, a rehab clinic, and a gym. And my wife was having our first baby, and we went on a walk one night, and she's like, hey, I don't want to be a single mom. She wasn't talking about leaving me. She was talking about me not being present, because I was just like the full focus on work without really being focused, if that makes any sense at all. I hire a mentor. And the first thing he taught me was that if I wanted to be better at business, I had to learn to be a better person. I was like, I don't understand what you mean. I treat everybody the way that I want to be treated. He said, yes, you do. But the problem is that you're a psychopath. And people don't like being treated like a psychopath when that's not who they are. And so it was really good advice. And I took it all the way in, all the way. And it allowed me to have some success for a while where I was like, oh, being somebody else is working. Like me not being myself is working. People are starting to come. I don't have to, like, they don't want me, but they want what I can do for them. So let me just meet them where they are all the time. And I can just push me down a little bit. And it got to the point no less than 7-8 months ago where I was like, no, fuck that. Like this is exactly what's holding me and us back. And there are 30 people who work in this company who depend on me being the leader who they deserve. And so then I decided to step back forward as all of me with all of the lessons I learned along the way. So me is not the same me who it was back then. And since that, everything has started to change. And so it's I was never quiet the way that you were describing being quiet, but I was muted.
Yeah.
I was coming through as like 70% of me.
Yeah. And I think there's a level of EQ of, okay, I can judge a certain situation and know how I can show up in this situation, which doesn't mean I'm not being all of me, right? You're not being all of Sean. I'm not being all of Rachel in this situation, but there's a level of EQ of how can I really co-regulate with the people that I'm with to create safety for these people. I think that's very high level EQ versus like, it's to be like, this is who the fuck I am and deal with it. Like that type of mentality is actually very toxic. And it's like, no, like you should change if you are like hurting other people, but it's saying you don't need to shift or change or modify yourself in order to be accepted or loved or to be good enough, right? So it's like this fine balance of, yes, I can tune in with other people. I can read the room and how I can really show up and create empathy and safety for these other people, but I'm also not going to not be all of me simultaneously.
Yeah. It's being
hard to do.
Yeah. It's being the best version of you instead of the lazy version. That's the way I started to look at it. Because the lazy version is just scorch the earth. Like I'll just plow through anything. And if you don't want to keep up, you don't have to. But that's not productive. It's not how everybody functions. And it's lazy because it's easy. That's what's easy. But the best version is able to speed up for some people, slow down for other people, ask questions for some, give orders for others, depending on where they want and how they want to be spoken with, without losing me in it. And so I just, when you shared that story, it was really, I don't even know what the right word is. It felt like a hug. It was good.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting and worth talking about with you is how this kind of stuff, like living as somebody else, not being all of yourself, having the anxiety that you were talking about earlier, constantly, even forget about the presence of the medication as a pharmacological substance in your bloodstream, but thinking about it as, I need these things, right? Like just the mindset of it. You're one of the few people I've spoken with who consider all of that stuff when it comes to health that's measurable, because it's woo-woo if you describe look, your relationship with this person, your relationship with is a reflection of your relationship with yourself.
But why is it woo-woo, right? That's what's so interesting. It's like we put woo-woo in a category where it's like dealing with emotions and it's things like we're just not familiar with. And I think, we live so much in just like the logic side of everything. Like if you look at all of personal development, right? Let's work on mindset and let's work on the story that we tell ourselves, right? Which is incredible, which is great. We should be working on that, but in my opinion, we're missing the greatest area of personal development that we can really lean into, which is not logical. It is the body at the core, and the body is the feeler. The body is emotional. The body is intuitive at nature. This is the very animalistic part of ourselves. And I think what most people have is a massive disconnect between their psyche and their soma. So the mind-body connection of what they have. So they are operating so much up here, but they actually don't really know themselves, right? To be able to feel, like we numb out all of the emotions we don't want to feel, right? We walk through things in our life. We have trauma we haven't addressed, right? And there are certain emotions that are very suppressed that are in the body that actually lead to a massive dysregulated nervous system for most people. And I think most people operate from a very dysregulated nervous system. They constantly live stuck in a sympathetic dominant state. They live in a fight or flight state because of everything that they do, and also this disconnect that they have from their body and their emotions. And here's the thing, when you don't actually allow emotions to be fully expressed from the body, when you numb out all of that, what you're actually doing is you are numbing out your ability to feel and experience all of life in a lot of ways. So talking about the greatest personal development, wouldn't that be to be able to feel and experience life at the fullest? Well, when we are disconnected from our mind, from our body, we lose the ability to completely do so, because when you numb out, especially medications, right? What are those doing? A lot of these medications are numbing out. You don't want to feel. So we're getting rid of our ability to feel, right? But we do that with other things. It's not just medication. It can be social media. It can be work, right? So we look at people who they don't actually want to feel the pain that they have in their life, emotions. So they put all of their time into their work, right? They're not actually present, because if they actually took time to sit with themselves, to be present, to actually just go, hey, how am I doing? I can guarantee they would be so uncomfortable, right? These people are so uncomfortable just having to sit there with themselves. Same thing, we distract. We get on social media. I even find myself sometimes getting on. I'm like, what am I doing? Right? Just because of that dopamine reaction at the core. So I think one of the most incredible type of work that I've done for myself is really working on healing the emotional body. And as we heal, which can also be the allowance for the full expression of emotion that has been untapped into for a long time, which is scary for a lot of people to lean into. But it's like in the process, you give yourself the ability to feel again, to feel all of life, to actually lean into your intuition. Like if you're somebody who struggles with their intuition, like what is the right thing? What is the wrong thing to do? You're so much here. That's usually a sign of a big disconnect from your body and from the emotional side at the core. This is where I can go real woo-woo.
I like it. So here's, I think woo-woo goes too far when it detaches from all forms of reality. And that examples of that I can think of, like the best one I can think of is, I don't know if you know how Steve, like the end of Steve Jobs' life, but he refused the medications. He refused the treatment. He refused all of the things because he was going to go move to Costa Rica and think it away. And there's value to that. And there's value for when you need to do an intervention, whether it's medical, whether it's nutritional, whether it's exercise, whatever it is. It's not, I think that sometimes people get so wrapped up in their own mind that they forget that they actually are somebody. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's the best example I can give outside of that is, I know people who've gotten into psychedelics for example, and I'm all for it. Go ahead. do psychedelics. I don't mind psychedelics at all. I've dabbled myself. But it's when it becomes like, what's real? Is that even real? Maybe we're just in a thing. Maybe we're just in a simulation. Like maybe it's not even real. Let's just see what happens. I'm like, no, like something has to be fucking real.
Yeah, I have an opinion about psychedelics, and I'm not even afraid to share it, but I think we put so much dependency on something outside of ourselves to heal ourselves. The body wants to heal. The body wants to, and where psychedelics can be beneficial is often it can allow for a lot of that emotions that are trapped to actually make their way out of the body for a lot of people. But where I think it ends up hurting a lot of people is they now are saying, hey, this thing is helping me. This thing is going to help me heal. The body knows how to heal. And actually, you have the power to be able to heal yourself. Now, it's scary to lean into. And I think part of it is actually allowing to feel a lot of the things most of us don't want to feel. Like that we've been harboring. I think a lot of dis-ease that we have, right? And I do all of the functional medicine testing. You know, we'll look at what's up in the gut microbiome. We'll look at hormones, thyroid. We'll look at hidden toxins. And all of these things, of course, contribute to dis-ease in the body. But I think the other piece of the equation is a lot of dis-ease is a byproduct of emotional suppression. And what that actually does to the nervous system is a byproduct of it all.
How so?
Emotional suppression.
Like, so I'm hearing you, and there's a mechanism there that I think is there's a leap that people need to be able to make to believe this, and I've experienced it myself through my own health, through my own mental health, all of it, and it's almost like I don't know if you've ever, I imagine you have, but you can see somebody's blood pressure on their face, right? When somebody shows up and you're like, you have high blood pressure, and it's got you don't have to take their blood pressure. You can just see the energy on their face and you're like, there's an underlying problem here. And your blood pressure is what a doctor would treat with a medication. But your problem isn't the blood pressure. The result of your problem is the blood pressure. But there's a leap that when you say that to somebody who doesn't understand or doesn't necessarily want to believe that or doesn't want to sit with themselves the way you were describing it, it's easier to, as you described, numb it with a medication that reduces the symptom. Is there a mechanism that you would be able to explain where these suppressed emotions become the physiological measurable problem that we treat with medications but needs to be treated at the emotional level?
Yeah, I think the best way I can describe it is by understanding how the nervous system really operates, right? And so trauma, which you can think of trauma as, you know, something that happened really, really fast in your lifetime that it exposed you, created more so fear, and it puts you in this kind of reflexive, sympathetic dominant state. You can look at trauma as that way, but also you can look at it as, you know, things that have, you know, that thing from the past now coming into our present and also creating our future. So often a lot of these traumas are integrated into our nervous system in a lot of ways, right? And if we had the opportunities when a lot of these traumas happen to actually be able to experience them fully, actually emotionally release them. If you look at animals, right, when they go through traumatic things in their life, like they take time and they shake, right? If you see a zebra get attacked in the wild, like they shake it all off, right? Which actually shaking is something that we were born with and we had the ability to do, but over time we lost that ability because we look at shaking as something that's weak. So there's, side note, a really interesting type of therapy called TRE, trauma release exercises, that actually teaches people how to reignite their body's ability to tap into tremors, to release a lot of that built up energy from their body, right, that we carry. But a lot of these things that happen are stored in our nervous systems at the core, right? And then what happens is this creates a dysregulated nervous system. So the nervous system either feels safe or it doesn't, There is zero in between. So when it feels safe, we're in a parasympathetic state, a rest and a digest state. When we are operating in a rest and a digest state, the body is able to fully heal, right? The body's not going to heal when it is trying to run away from danger, when it's trying to fight, right? It's on guard. Cortisol is elevated. Blood pressure is high, right? Talking about the guy who has high blood pressure, right? This person is operating in a sympathetic state, which is purposeful. We need the sympathetic state as much as we need the parasympathetic state, essentially. But often when our nervous system becomes dysregulated, when we have these traumas, not only does it narrow the window of our stress threshold, so maybe there are certain things in our life that maybe doesn't stress out one person, but the other person, it sends them into, more of that sympathetic state. And also a lot of us get stuck living in a sympathetic dominant state. So these are a lot of the people who are living in a heightened anxiety place, heightened nervous system, right? And you can feel those people's energy often when they walk in a room. They're going a million miles an hour. They're super fast. It's like they're strung up on coffee. And then eventually what happens is this person will reach burnout, right? They'll reach burnout. Well, what is burnout? This is the body actually doing what it wants to do, which is heal. And it's saying, you're operating here for too long, so I'm going to force you into a parasympathetic state. I'm going to make you really tired. Or you're going to get sick because of the immune system suppression. So now you're going to be going into more of a parasympathetic state. Also, people can get stuck more on the parasympathetic side too, which is also not good, because you can think of that as often depression at the core, right? So health is the ability to choose. It's the ability to go back and forth when we want to. It's the ability to self-regulate. So, something happens in your life that's stressful, your nervous system upregulates. But after you're able to self-regulate and bring yourself back down, a lot of people don't have that ability to do so. And often it is a byproduct of these traumas that we've had in our life that have been integrated into our nervous system, that haven't been able to be fully expressed. And therefore, we are operating in this dysregulated nervous system. I'd say most people are living in a very sympathetic dominant state. If we look at our world, we look at our culture, right? Social media, we look at, how much we're working, the type of jobs that people have, right? Like stress is so high, not only from a lifestyle standpoint, but then you combine in a lot of the unaddressed emotional pieces in there. So people are operating in this state. So what is actually happening on more so the physiological level is cortisol is chronically elevated all the time. The gut is completely shut down as a byproduct because we're not in that rest and that digest state. The body is not producing digestive enzymes that it actually needs. Inflammation levels go up when we're living in this sympathetic state. So inflammation is the root cause often of a lot of chronic disease at the core. And then since the gut is shut down, a lot of the motility issues at the core, but this creates the onset for microbiome imbalances, often SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So a lot of people who have gut issues, and people will talk about like digestive issues. We'll also look more at mental health too, right? Because there's a lot of inflammation. Maybe we see microbiome imbalances too, high levels of cortisol. There's going to be the whole neuroendocrine response of what is happening there with the adrenals upregulating a lot of cortisol. So there's a lot of more of that anxiety type response. This can also downregulate thyroid. So now thyroid is becoming suppressed. We can see sex hormones declining too as a byproduct, hormonal imbalances, thyroid issues. And so you can really start to see how this is creating a whole cascade of dis-ease in the body, all as a byproduct of chronic stress, trauma, and a dysregulated nervous system.
That was really good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there's a balancing act that I'm really curious how you do. Because, well, first of all, I want to say something else. I can't even count the number of people when they've asked me, what is my definition of health? I say access to choices. That's it. If you can't choose yes or no, you're lacking health in that area, whether it's financial, mental, physical. If you can't say yes or no to going on the hike because you want to or don't want to, But instead you have to think about, is there a bench there? Is there uphill? Is there downhill? How long is it? Will we have places to stop? You're lacking health there, right? If you have to check all the prices on the menu when you go out to dinner and you're ordering off of this part of the menu because it's less expensive, you're lacking health in your finances because you don't have the choices that more health in that area would give you. It was cool to hear you define health as the ability to choose.
The ability to choose.
Yeah, I love that. The balancing act I'm talking about is somebody can come to you for help with their health, and their nutrition, their diet can be awful. It can be all over the map. They can be eating McDonald's. They can be just not eating high nutritious foods. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end could be somebody who's trying to biohack their way to health instead of just being healthy. And then these people also are going to have this emotional component to it and this identity component to it. You have to be able to solve for both. And I imagine some people come to you understanding all of that, because the way you speak on your social media really does speak to both sides of this. But I also imagine that there are people who come to you thinking that they're a few macros away from a different life. How do you handle that conversation and service that person?
So the person...
Either, by the way.
Yeah. So all disease comes back to also 4 different types of stress. So we're talking about stress here. So there is dietary stress, which is going to be the majority of people because of the food that they're eating. They're eating the McDonald's. They're eating the SAD diet, the standard American diet. Then we have the emotional piece. That's next. So this could be just overall stress levels in life. This could also be the emotional side. This could be relationship with self. This could be unaddressed trauma, emotional suppression. So that's the second piece. Then there is physical health. So you do a lot on the physical health side, right? So this could be injuries. This could be imbalances physically in the body. This could be also just overtraining, right? That was something I was doing when I was competing in bodybuilding. So it was a metabolic type of stress that I was experiencing. And then the last is an environmental stressors. So, right, this could be somebody who has mold toxicity. Could be somebody who has heavy metals. This could be somebody who has Lyme disease, different infections. So normally all disease comes back to one of these 4 key things. So we need to look at it all. Essentially, usually we're going to start first with most people on the nutrition side of everything, right? Because I do think that we can make some really good shifts and changes first through nutrition, getting people to eat food that actually loves them back, right? So I always say, it's not self-love to eat foods that wreak havoc on your gut and your hormones and all of these things, like these foods that are not good for your body. And I know a lot of culture says of like, hey, balance and all of these things. And I'm not saying you can't have those things every now and again, but if your health is really struggling, you are coming to me because you have anxiety, you have depression, because you are so unhappy in your physical body, you are overweight, you have so much inflammation. We're not talking about balance here. We are talking about we need to start doing the things that are most loving for you and that create healing. And often that can mean creating, which for most people would be a restrictive diet. I don't believe it's restrictive at all. I call it just, eating real whole food, not eating all the processed food. So cutting out a lot of the foods that are creating damage and disease in the body. And for most people, just by making some of those shifts, we're going to see massive improvement in their mental health, in their inflammation levels, in their anxiety levels, in their depression levels, right? Because food really is medicine at the core. And normally when we can create some good shifts on the nutrition side, we may not be 100% there. Most people won't be 100% there, right? Because health involves all of these other factors too. But it allows us to then start having some other conversations. So we'll focus on nutrition a lot for the first month. We'll get people set up on a good healing diet. And then usually their labs will come back and we'll be able to also look at, okay, what is actually off in the body. And we may actually see someone does have some different infections or toxins, so we'll create a game plan for addressing that. We may then get to know somebody and their lifestyle and their background and their history and their stress levels, and be able to say, okay, we think there's a bit more of like the emotional side that's really coming in. But what's interesting is we can actually sometimes test a little bit of that. So we can run a full, 24-hour adrenal test and actually look at what is happening with somebody's cortisol levels. We can see if their cortisol levels are chronically elevated. We can see if they're actually low, which you may think that's a good thing, but it's definitely not, because usually that's what's happening, kind of like a diabetic where cortisol has been so high for a long time and now it's actually suppressed. So we can look at cortisol, DHEA, we can look at hormones and thyroid, and we can look at these overall patterns that we're seeing and probably deduct, okay, what is really happening on an emotional and a stress level, what is happening on the nervous system. And I'm usually pretty good at reading somebody's energy too. So like you said earlier, energy, as you were talking about, I forget who, it was a client or somebody, but you can usually tell somebody's nervous system just based off of the energy that they're bringing in. So it's a little bit of detective work, right? So functional medicine isn't like, hey, just follow this diet and we're going to fix you, do this one workout program. It is very individualized, but it is addressing these areas, starting first with diet. I think that is low-hanging fruit for a lot of people.
Yeah. It's interesting that that you described that we work with the physical stress of people, because it's akin to what you're describing from the other side of it. Mm-hmm. The reason people come to us is because everyone else has tried the physical thing with them and it hasn't worked. And they come to us thinking these people have the physical thing that will work. And what ends up being the thing that actually works is the environment and the mental. Mm-hmm. Right? But just like you would describe leading with nutrition, we lead with the physical because we have to meet people where they are. They're coming in with the expectation of a physical assessment, a physical exercise. And when we can start to demonstrate credibility, authority, and progress, then the door is open for conversations around, by the way, you mentioned that you keep on waking up in the middle of the night. And you've tried all of these tactics so that you can go back to sleep. But you've never addressed the reason why you keep on waking up in the middle of the night. Why do you think that's happening? Mm-hmm. We've earned the trust now to have that conversation.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah. You also said something else, and I want to make sure I bring attention to it. How do you avoid playing I want to ask that next. I have an order of operations in my head, and I'm trying to get back to it. Do you believe that there's a level of intuition that has to be there too? Because you talked about detective work. Mm-hmm. And I agree on the detective work side. And sometimes I feel like there's just also just a feeling. Mm-hmm. And the question has to be asked. And sometimes you're wrong. But it's always worth the question. Do you find that too?
Yeah, I think practitioners, like really good practitioners, will often rely a bit on their own intuition. And then there's like the science part, like we have to look into it. We'll do the testing, we'll prove it, we'll ask the right questions. Also, it's like intuition. You've been doing this for so long, you do start to see similar patterns with a lot of people. So it's like, is it intuition or is this just the kind of like recall? I've seen this a lot of time, but there is also often a bit of that intuition place coming in, which is why it's so important for the practitioner to also have done a lot of the work themselves, to be able to really maybe lean into that intuition, for them to know themselves, to walk into a consult with a client and to be grounded in their self, to have that type of an alignment, ultimately will allow for there to be a transfer in energy, right? But also I think for us to be able to lean more into intuition. And I think that's why I'm just a big advocate for coaches, practitioners. Like you have to do the work on yourself. Like for me, like I'm only able to help people at the level that I can help them at based off of the level I've helped myself at. Mm-hmm.
Well, we talked about this briefly on social media. It's teaching from the scars, not from the wounds. Mm-hmm. The idea that it's difficult to meet somebody where they are if they're going through something really difficult and you haven't.
Mm-hmm.
You've never faced.
We call that range. So I'm a somatic breathwork practitioner as well. And which is like what brings in the emotional side. Like I'm not counseling people on their trauma, but I am helping them in this way have some of that emotional suppression and create some more awareness around different things. But I remember when I was getting certified in somatic breathwork, we talked about something called range. So it's like you can only go as far with somebody else as far as you are willing to go with yourself, or you have gone with yourself. So they actually had us do all these exercises, and they were all emotional exercises. So it was like anger, joy, love, resistance. So it was really cool because they were like, hey, give me level 2 anger. We had to fully embody that, and we had to act like you could, yes, act it out, but fully embody it too. Like tap into that emotion. And then they would say like, hey, give us level 5, give us level 8. Now give us level 10. And you would see, and I felt it to myself, the amount of resistance that would come up. Like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go to level 10 anger. But when like I did it, it felt so good. But I also thought this was such a cool exercise because then we did it, like I said, with joy and love. And what's interesting is for everybody, it was a bit different. Like for some people, it's harder for them to go to like level 10 love or to level 10 joy, right? It's like, here's where I like, ooh, I have resistance. I don't want to let myself go there. But why it was so crucial for us to do these exercises and allow ourselves to go to level 10 and all of these is because a lot of the work that we do is we hold space for other people to go there. So if I can't go to level 10 anger and somebody else is in a session bringing in their intensity of anger, what is going to happen to me? I'm going to almost contract. I'm going to not know what to do. And now I'm not able to actually help this person in my fullest capacity because I can't hold space for their fullness and everything that they're bringing. So I think it's such a powerful practice. But what you were saying really reminded me of that. It's the range we have with ourselves allows us to have that range with other people.
We talk about that in the sales process. A question I like to ask people is, how many people are suffering right now because you didn't have the capacity to suffer in the meeting? You're sitting across from somebody. They need badly what you have, but they start crying. They tell you a story that's really sad. They're genuine. As far as they know, this is the truth. And the proverbial you just can't fucking handle it. And so you let them leave without becoming a client. And there was nobody else who was going to help them. And you knew it was you. It was you all along. You were the only person who could help them. But because you were unprepared to go with them emotionally, they're suffering now.
And sometimes I think we also don't bring an energy where people feel safe even to go there.
Sure.
So like it's one thing where somebody will go there and we're like, ooh, I don't know what to do with this. But often people don't even feel safe enough to even go there.
So
people can sense that.
I have a story I think that you'll enjoy, might be the wrong word, but that I think that you'll like hearing. There was a woman who reached out to work with us one time, and she had a shoulder issue, and I told her, I think we can help you. She says, okay, I need to check with my husband. I didn't have the skill set at the time to handle that. I didn't know what to do. And so, of course, she didn't come back, right? There was no signing up. 6 months later, she calls me again, and she's like, hey, my shoulder's really bad. I went to the doctors, and they want to do surgery. And I was like, well, based on what you're describing, unfortunately, I don't think that we can help you. And when she came back that second time, something clicked for me. I was like, I failed that person. I knew this was going to happen, and I failed her. I let her tell me that she had to talk to her husband about it. So I decided I would never let that happen to somebody again. And I became the most airtight person I could be when it came to communication, sales, service, all of it. Thinking she would never come back. A year later, she's on my schedule again. And she says, I ended up getting surgery. It didn't work. I got a second surgery, and it worked. And then I forget what she said she was doing, and she's like, oh, cooking. I felt a pop in my shoulder. And she's like, so I went to the doctor and they said I need surgery again. And they said I might need surgery number 4. And if that doesn't work, perhaps a shoulder replacement. She was in her young 30s. She was crying hysterically the whole time on the call. I was not capable of going with a woman on the other side of the phone crying the year and a half prior. But I went there with her for an hour and a half. She ends up enrolling. About 2 years later, a year and a half later, she comes to speak at one of our events. She's telling our clients about the experience of everything that she went through. And she told our entire group of clients at the time, she's like, it got so bad that I considered killing myself because I had lost my identity. I couldn't exercise anymore. I couldn't be a good wife. I couldn't cook. I couldn't do my hair. I couldn't wash myself. And there was no hope from the surgeons. Room full of people, myself included, in a puddle. Right? I never knew that. And so that is a memory I will always have. Yeah. That is a reminder of the necessity of the range that you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. How do you avoid playing psychologist? In other words, there's a level of coaching that is psychology. And then there's a level of coaching that exceeds the scope of a coach or a functional medicine practitioner and needs a mental health professional.
Sure.
How do you decide?
Yeah, I think, we don't heal people. I used to actually use the term that I'm a healer. Mm-hmm. No, I kind of laugh at it looking at it back. But we're not healing anybody. We are creating this space and the opportunity for someone to heal themselves. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they have all of the power. We're just guiding them in the right direction. So we'll do that with nutrition. We'll utilize the testing. We'll help create different protocols for them based off of that. And then we may have some tough conversations as well. But we're never telling people this is what's happening. This is hey, this is what's causing X, Y, and Z, at least on the emotional side, right? We may ask some difficult questions, right, that people can really come to conclusions for themselves. I think most people know, right, when we ask the right questions on what's really contributing to a lot of their core health issues, right? How is their relationship with themselves? How, emotionally, what is really there? When you sit with yourself, what really comes up? We can look at stress levels, all of this, and oftentimes it's us just having the conversation with them and the client creating enough awareness, and then we're pointing them in the right direction. We're not coaching. We're not going into someone's trauma and their history and then saying, here, let me work with you on it. We're having the necessary conversations to then create space for people to do their own inner work that they need to do. And sometimes, like you said, that is pointing them in the direction of a mental health specialist. Sometimes this is more on the somatic side of things, which that is why I did get certified in somatic breath work to do. I like it because it's more so working with the mind-body connection, and it's actually taking a lot of the coaching side out of it. If anything, there's very little words that are said throughout the entire experience, but it is so healing for so many people. But it's healing through co-regulation, right? So actually the relationship with the practitioner and with the person there, and then teaching the person how to then self-regulate. So they learn that tool of how can I really self-regulate myself. It's allowing for that expression of emotion without there often have to be a lot of thoughts and stories and all of these things intertwined. But in a lot of ways in a lot of ways, it is actually part of that healing process, right? And I think sometimes the mind actually gets in the way in a lot of these things. But yeah, then for other people, it is pointing them in the right direction. And then it's helping people who come to the awareness of hey, these are some big lifestyle changes I need to make. We've had people who they realize as they go on this journey, like their environment, their work is not conductive for their overall health. Now, we're not going to say to somebody, like, you need to quit your job. Like your job is what is creating all of your health issues. Now, we may ask some powerful questions about their work and their health, and oftentimes people will come to the solution of, hey, this isn't going to work for me. I can't heal in this environment. And that's part of it. Often there is a big environmental factor. We can't heal in the environment that makes us sick, right? So I think as long as we stay very curious and we don't position ourselves as I am healing somebody, it allows for us to just more so be a guide for people to heal themselves.
Yeah. The person I was talking about before ended up ending our marriage. Same idea, like questions. It's never, you can't say a person who doesn't support you doing this isn't a person you should be married to. But you can ask questions about why it's so important that person approves of you taking care of yourself. Do they understand why it's important to you that you take care of yourself? How did you communicate it with them? All of those kinds of things. And then they, like you said, they can land on their own thing that is, I have done all of those things. They do understand, and they still chose, no, I can't tolerate that. Do you find it hard to find other people who think like you do?
For a long time, yes. And then I've slowly found some of my people. But I mean, yeah.
One of the hardest things I find is when I'm looking to, I've been very fortunate. Business has had its ebbs and flows, but overall it's a flow. And one of the things that I've often struggled with, and I'm curious your perspective on this, is anytime I've gone to work with somebody on business mentorship, not always, but usually, they go straight to, this is the tactic we're going to use. This is how we're going to generate more money. This is all of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, that somebody who is immature in business or new in entrepreneurship, all the things that they would do, but at a scale level. Do you follow me there? Like, this is how we need to get more opt-ins to your funnel. And then we're going to do this with the opt-ins. And then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do that. Like, there's a math formula to helping people. And I find that this is akin to the balance of the science and the mind that we were talking about earlier in business. Like, yeah, some of that has to be there. And most of the people who I come across are so focused on the line items that I have a hard time wanting to stay in conversation with them.
It's like that heart piece, right, of what we're talking about. And, the logic piece, the strategy piece, the tactical part of it all, I think that can be needed and it can be great. I think what the problem is we're missing a lot of the heart, right? And I think when we can have a beautiful synergy between both of these things, right, like the heart, the mind, and also too, sometimes the heart can actually get us into trouble in a lot of ways. But I think it is overly relying on just the strategy piece of it all.
Yeah. I love the strategy and the tactics.
It's fun.
It's
do X, Y, Z, get Y result, right?
Or it doesn't work and you're like, oh, but I know what to do next time.
Yeah.
I love that. I think you described it well with the heart. I find that, especially in our world, where the goal of the business is to help people help themselves and live a different life than they otherwise could, I find it really uninspiring when the focus is the tactics and the money instead of the people.
Yeah. I have seen, though, some people who, like, actually, my favorite people to sometimes go work with are the people who, they actually suck at all the social media things and all of that. Like, you're like, ooh, you're a great find. But then there's some of those, it's like, okay, you need a little bit of strategy. Yeah. Like, I'm like, these people, I love finding them because I'm like, you could be huge, because all of they have focused on is really the service and the heart and all of that in their business. And they haven't really dove into any strategy. But then you're like, hey, man, you could be like, I could really, and some people, they're like, great, yes, let's do that. And some people, they're like, okay, I'm good with what I have.
You're talking about the professionals who you would help.
No, I mean like finding people, like maybe people I've even worked with myself, right? So sometimes even the best coaches I've worked with, they didn't have a big brand or anything behind them. If anything, they kind of really sucked at marketing. And I almost didn't work with them. But then when I worked with them, they were just so good at what they did and the service side of it all, where I'm like, hey, let me help you a little bit on the strategy side.
Right. You get more of me if you did that. I got you.
Yeah.
I do want to add, like, I love this conversation. This is where I love to live. It's the idea of the whole person. And we can talk about all of the things that go into helping this person become the best version. And I could do this for 7 hours. What I want to do is I want to help meet some people where they are and ask some questions that came in when I asked my audience on social media what they wanted to know from you. Okay. I'm going to be selfish and I'm going to ask you the first question. When I was reading your book, which I do have right over here, Root Cause, right? I read much of it. My daughter was impressed with how much I got through. It's a big, it's good. There's a lot of content and it's all practical and applicable. One of the things that you talked about when it came to the exercise portion, I believe it was gaining awareness as to whether we're in an anabolic or a catabolic state. And I'm curious if you can simply describe how somebody would know they're living in a catabolic state. So to lay out some groundwork for people so that you don't have to do all of this work, catabolic is effectively things are breaking down. Anabolic is things are building up. In the book, you describe exercises that are catabolic being things that are repetitive, cardio-based, if you're thinking about it from home to oversimplify. Monostructural cardio activities are catabolic. Weight training, for example, is anabolic. But the idea of being in an anabolic or a catabolic state is much harder to wrap one's mind around than doing a catabolic or anabolic activity. How can somebody know?
So it's the amount of stress that's on the body, right? And like to know from a data perspective, sometimes we do need to do some testing. I mentioned adrenal testing. That can definitely be great. We can also look at things structurally too. If someone's been in a catabolic state for a really long time, the loss of skeletal muscle mass. So we'll often see, these are women who are older and maybe they're postmenopausal and, they're very deficient in skeletal muscle mass and maybe they have some extra adipose tissue, right? And then they're really struggling on the metabolic side of everything. But essentially being in a catabolic state is a byproduct of too many stressors and usually not a whole lot of recovery. So if we look at this from a nutrition perspective, this is somebody who is living in a caloric deficit, right? So fasting too, at the core, fasting is putting your body in more of a catabolic state. These are all different stressors on the body. Now we can go there for a short period of time. So when we talk about even like weightlifting being anabolic, so acute stress at the core is anabolic, right? So you do weightlifting. For that period of time, it's a stressor. You are breaking things down. You actually go into a little bit of a catabolic state because it's just acute. Then the body has prime recovery, right? So it's able to build back stronger, especially if nutrition is there, right? To match it, getting enough protein, getting in just enough calories in general at the core. But when somebody is in a catabolic state, usually they're living predominantly, kind of going back to what we talked about nervous system, but more in the sympathetic state. So they're often being run a bit more on cortisol. So when someone's in more of a chronic caloric deficit over an extended period of time, the body is in a catabolic state. It is in a breakdown state, right? We are burning more than we are taking in energy-wise. So the body's in a breakdown state. Now the body has two options on what it's going to break down. Right? It's going to either break down fat or it's going to break down muscle tissue. People also don't realize when they're focusing on fat loss, you're putting your body in a catabolic state. So what also happens as a byproduct of being in a catabolic state, we will see weight loss. Yes. We will also see cortisol go up. quite a bit. And after being in this for an extended period of time, we'll also see hormones decrease. We'll see thyroid levels decrease. And often this is where people are like, oh my gosh, I have thyroid issues. Yes, but it's not the root issue. And actually these are normal feedback loops that are happening as a byproduct of being in an extended catabolic state. But we have the two options. We have fat or we have muscle, right? And if we're in a very high catabolic state, could be a very severe caloric deficit. Let's say you also combine that with a lot of emotional stress in somebody's life, right? And all of these other factors, the body is then going to catabolize the energy that it has stored wise, especially if it doesn't have enough coming in, right? So we hope that it maybe will just break down fat, right, if someone's in a caloric deficit. But if we're not getting enough animal protein, I could just say protein, but if we're not getting in enough protein, I prioritize more animal protein.
Steak for dinner.
If we're not doing the things that maintain skeletal muscle mass, which is resistance training, and probably not training till failure too if you're in a very catabolic state, and we're not getting in enough high quality protein to support muscle, the body is going to actually start to catabolize our muscle tissue and burn that for energy. So the goal is, when someone's focusing on fat loss, is to prioritize still the resistance training and high quality protein. Actually, you need more protein when you're in a catabolic state. You need more protein because your body is actually burning through often amino acids and can pull that from muscle tissue to burn it as energy. So I would say a big thing to look at is, am I in a caloric deficit? Am I doing, way too much fasting? Where are my stress levels at? And a lot of these things can usually indicate if somebody's operating out of a catabolic state. And also energy levels. Mm-hmm. Are you at a net energy loss? Because when you're in a catabolic state, you are tired. There's a lot more fatigue because you're operating at a net loss.
So another question that I know came through, I'm going to put my phone out for a second to start to pull up some other ones, but the question was, what are your thoughts on Ozempic? And I want to ask it in a little bit of a more specific way based on the answer you just gave. You're talking about...
I bet you could guess.
Yeah, well, I think it's the same as mine. But the thing I find interesting about, the reason that this popped into my mind as the next question to ask is, that puts you in a permanent catabolic state. And it's breakdown of both fat and muscle tissue. And so I guess my question to you about it is there ever a time when it would be the thing that you would recommend to somebody, or at least consider for somebody?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back to the conversation about medication, right? I think there's always certain scenarios where medication, where these different things can be useful, but is it a long-term solution? No.
Right.
And are we really still addressing the root issue? And also we have to look at what are going to be the side effects, the long-term issues that arise as a byproduct of being on a lot of these. Like a lot of the weight loss medications, like semaglutide, like a lot of people who are now utilizing that, like we're seeing a lot of gut issues arising from that. And often a lot of these medications that people get on, like when they get off of it, like all of their problems come back. So people have to literally be on these for life.
Yeah. Yeah. The Ozempic one is a scary one for me because of the way I'm seeing people in the medical community kind of rally behind it. People who I felt like, frankly, had more integrity.
Yeah.
Are almost chilling for it in a way that I'm shocked and disheartened. But I'm hopeful that there's more people like you who are speaking to the root cause of a reason you would need it in the first place. Let me get to some of the questions that were specifically asked. One of them is in my archive. I know that I should have taken a screenshot, but I didn't. Let's see. It was from a nurse about hyperthyroid or thyroid stuff. Totally should have this queued up. Let me ask you a different one while I look for this one. What is the appropriate amount of protein for somebody as we age?
As we age?
So the question was, it's from a woman who is about 40 years old, and she's wondering what the appropriate amount of protein is, and she's wondering if that changes as she gets older.
Yes. So usually I recommend 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight of protein, which is much higher than the RDA. But the RDA was based off of the recommended daily amount, the minimum amount that somebody needs to literally not be sick. So we don't want to aim for that. We want to be optimal. But as we get older, our protein requirements actually go up, which unfortunately, as we get older, and like we look at the older adult population, we see the opposite happening, right? We see most people eating less protein. We see them skipping meals, right? And also our risk for catabolizing muscle mass as we get older is much higher, right? So the risk of sarcopenia, so actually going up to even 1.2 grams per pound of ideal body weight is going to be more ideal as somebody is getting older. Let's say into like women in the menopausal years.
Perfect. Thank you. Found the question. Any dietary advice for high thyroid antibodies?
High thyroid antibodies. Yeah. Gut.
Yeah. What do you
We
mean
have
gut?
to heal the gut. So what she's speaking to is an autoimmune condition, right? So when there are antibodies produced for the thyroid, that is usually Hashimoto's, and the body is now attacking itself. So let's look at any type of an autoimmune condition. There's 3 things that contribute to an autoimmune condition. 1, genetics, but we know genetics only attribute to up to 30% of autoimmune conditions, which also can still be addressed. So a lot of people who have autoimmune conditions actually have genetic defects, COMT, COMT, MTHFR. These are methylation issues, and methylation is very, very important for the body's ability to detox, deal with inflammation throughout the body, the immune system. So oftentimes if you get tested and you have a methylation issue, you need to be taking methylation support. So there are pre-methylated B vitamins and folate that can actually bypass a lot of these genetic defects, but we see a heightened level of autoimmune conditions with people who have methylation issues. So 1 would be genetics, which we can still do something about. The other would then be the gut. So 70% of the immune system, like we said it earlier, is based out of the gut. So this could be gut pathogens. This could be microbiome imbalances. This could be intestinal permeability, right? So I would probably assume that there's some leaky gut that's happening. So we need to heal the gut. Then the last area would be more so environmental toxins throughout the body. So this could be, we could see a history of Lyme disease, mold, these different toxins that are then going to cause a heightened immune and inflammatory response. So we call this the autoimmune triad. So these 3 areas. So in functional medicine, we'll address all of the areas to really lower the body's immune upregulation and inflammatory response to get the body back into more into balance versus Western medicine's approaches. Thyroid medication, especially if the thyroid has become suppressed or upregulated as a byproduct, or in more severe cases, it can even be surgery removal for some.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot. What is the normal's not the right word. What is the ideal range for body fat on a woman who's healthy?
Yeah. So it's like, what is the standard? Because if you look at a lot of this standard body composition, even like scans and things online, they say what is healthy for women is 23 to 28%, actually.
That seems high.
That they consider that to be normal.
Okay.
But again,
is normal a measure of where we are?
Not unhealthy. Normal, okay. That's not a measure of optimal. So that would be the normal of not like ill.
But what I'm asking is, like, are they defining normal based on averages, or are they defining normal based on what they think is healthy?
I know with like most lab testing ranges, they're like determining a lot of those reference ranges based off of averages, which those averages are usually based off of sick populations. I'm not sure who creates the body composition. Right.
So I don't even care about that. I want to know what Rachel Scheer would want to see somebody at.
Yeah, I mean, females, athletic. So this could be, I would say, 23% to, I'd say 18, could maybe go down to 16%. But we're kind of getting to a lower point for females. So I'd say normally around that 18 to 23 is most ideal.
Can I ask what a normal body fat percentage for you is that you're walking around at?
You know, I get asked that all the time. I rarely test, but if I were to guess, I would say I'm sitting around 18% right now.
The reason I asked that is because I don't think it's revelatory that you have a body that you obviously take care of. And you can see it on your social media. And I believe women who do not have awareness to what kind of body composition you're holding would look at that and strive for a number that was nowhere near 18%.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you sharing that.
And also there's how are you storing your adipose tissue, right? Which a little bit of that is genetics and also hormones, right? So women in their younger years are going to store more fat in the lower part of their body. This is the more like female pattern fat storage. So this is where you can actually see women who are up to, I've seen women get up to like 30% body fat higher and still have even some ab definition, and but they will have a lot of the fat in the lower half of the body. So that's like more pear shape. But then women who go through menopause, right, a lot of that pattern starts shifting and they start storing a lot more fat around their midsection. So it's actually healthier to store more fat, in like the legs, the hips, and the thighs. Often. And then too, like I said, genetics can play a little bit of a role too. So, I store like all my adipose tissue in my legs and my thighs and all of that. Where some people, they do store in different areas easier. And then there's also too, like the structural component of abs, right? So some people, they have structurally good abdominal muscles. Some people, it's, I'm not saying not good, that wouldn't sound good, but they don't have it as, I guess, defined where they could actually get to maybe even, a lower percentage of body fat, but you don't still see it as defined.
So the last question from the audience is, when is working with a nutrition coach who got, for example, a precision nutrition level 1 or level 2 or whatever you want to call it, one of those certifications, acceptable as compared to needing to work with somebody with your level of education?
I think it depends on the person's goals, of course. Like if you are somebody who's like, I want to learn how to eat healthier and maybe I want to even learn a little bit more about macros and I just want to lose a little bit of weight. Great. I'm sure working with precision, what was it, level 1?
You haven't heard of precision nutrition?
No, I've heard of it.
Okay.
I've heard of it. But could be a good option. Now you have to ask yourself the question, what am I really struggling with in my health and what is it that I want to achieve? Right? So if you are struggling with more than just like the weight side of it or just learning how to eat healthier, like you are somebody who has a lot of these health issues. I mean, you have chronic fatigue all the time. Maybe you are struggling anxiety, depression. Maybe you are struggling with severe gut issues, so a lot of these chronic type symptoms, maybe body composition is a little bit of the goal. And yes, you want to learn how to eat healthy. I think that's where functional nutrition, functional medicine would be much more ideal, right? But normally for people to come to work with me, there's usually either a high pain point for them. They have a high pain point, like they're really struggling with their health. So they want to do functional medicine and get to the root cause. Maybe they've been let down from Western medicine too. So they've already gone that route for their health issues. Or, I mean, we also get some the crazy freaks who are just like, I want to know everything about my body and I want to optimize, and great. We welcome those people too.
That's me. I went to Gabrielle for that.
Yeah.
Not because I chose Gabrielle over you. I didn't know who you were yet.
Yeah. She's great.
She is great. I have 2 more questions from my own side of things.
Okay.
There's a post you made recently that stands out to me as really interesting. And it was a post where you were talking about, I don't remember exactly the language on it, but the take-home message was, it was you all along. It was always all about you. Do you know the post I'm talking about?
It was one from a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the premise of the post, I don't want to bastardize it. You let me know if I'm doing it no justice, was the idea that the person who you think you need to forgive is not the person who you need to forgive. The person you think you're angry at is not the person who you're angry at. It's always been you. You need to give yourself permission to be happy, to love yourself, to be all of yourself authentically all the time. That was what I took from it. Is that what you intended from it?
Yeah, I think so. I know the post you're talking about. So there was like the quote in it that says like, you know, true happiness comes from within.
Yes.
It doesn't come from anything that's outside of you. It's always been about you. It's always been about you. And I wrote a little bit about how, you know, what is really true happiness and creating the life that we want ultimately. And I truly believe a lot of that, and you've heard throughout this entire podcast, comes back to the relationship that we have with ourselves. I think it is the ability to have the fullest, most expressive self that we can have, to be able to bring that fully into the world without holding back, without self-judgment, with, of course, at times, we like may wonder what other people think, but to care about that the most. And it's the ability to feel fully, to feel all of life, right? I think a lot of this goes into like, what does it mean to be fully in your power? To be fully in your power is to feel everything, to experience all of life, to be able to hold space for strong emotions when they come up without trying to suppress them, without trying to get rid of them, without trying to numb, to be able to take action in the things that you need to take action in. It is to be able to be all of you and bring all of that.
When you make that post, what % of that is to yourself?
It's all to me.
Yeah.
It's all to me.
I thought it might be.
Yeah.
It's similar for me. Last question then for you. What you've exemplified today and what I've seen ever since Sam Miller connected us, I'm grateful for Sam for that. You're an impressive and unique woman. And the way that you help other people, I have a hard time believing that you learned that from a school. And I imagine that you learned elements from a school and the rest of it came from you learning something else, somewhere else, some things else, somewhere
Lots of
else.
things else.
Right. If you could give people who are listening to this right now a piece of advice as to how they can develop that I believe would be the most valuable thing that you've shared with anybody on this show, because the content around gut health, supplementation, nutrition, exercise, all of that we can find in a textbook. But you have a different level that you don't find in a textbook. And I think if you could help people tap into how they can get on theirs, that would be useful.
To put that into like a sentence, a word, and describe it. You know, it's been in the accumulation of my entire life. You know, I was the underdog. I've always been the underdog, right? I was in remedial classes in elementary school. I was not the smartest girl growing up. My family was broke. We foreclosed on our home growing up. I have a mentally ill father currently to this day who's homeless, who lives, you know, God knows where, right? I grew up with alcoholic parents. Like, I came from that. And, you know, despite coming from all of that, I always had this core belief of that I was not only meant for something great, but I was meant to serve so many people, and that I was also the one in my family that was really meant to shift and change the trajectory for my entire family. So for me, my entire life has been this journey of going inward, of doing a lot of the inner work. But in a lot of ways, it's been this journey of me fighting for this little 8-year-old girl, this little girl who was shy, who, you know, could barely speak up and use her voice. This girl who grew up with, parents who, were never really actually around, who had to learn to take care of herself. My whole journey has been to fight for that girl, for her to become the version of herself that, and it wasn't for anybody else, to be the version of herself that ultimately she needed in her life, right? I think that was what was so, I realized, like, profound about my journey and just speaking so heart openly. It was, I had to become what I ultimately needed, what I needed when I was that little 8-year-old girl, because I didn't have any of that. I had to create it for myself. And I I wouldn't change it for the entire world, but it's been a journey, of going through and like leaning into all of the darkness too. I think where people may listen to me and think like I'm a very, very complex person, it's also been a byproduct of I've had to learn to dance a lot with the dark sides of myself. I've leaned into all of the pain and all of the shit that I have not wanted to face or deal with. And a lot of that came after, my big wake up call of all of my health issues, of almost having my large intestine removed, of having a failed relationship in my life, of being able to just look at it and say, like, this isn't the direction I want to go. This isn't the life I want. And just saying, I'm going to go inward and I'm going to do a lot of this work. And it wasn't just like a one thing that I did. And I think so often people are looking for, like, what is that one thing, right? What is that one diet? What is all of this? It's been an accumulation of me fighting for myself my entire life. It's been the accumulation of me working with multiple different coaches, doing a lot of the therapy, the mindset coaching. It's been doing the somatic work. It's been working with the functional medicine practitioners, right? And there's not been one person who did it for me. I did it for me because I fought for myself my whole life. So I think the piece of advice that I would give anybody is, one, you have to be willing to fight for yourself, to really believe like you are worthy of the fight. You have to believe that. And when you truly believe that, and I know that everybody who's listening believes that. Now, sometimes we may question and doubt it, right? And we end up fighting against that little girl. We fight against her instead of with her, right? So I think a beautiful part of this journey is saying, no, I'm not fighting against you. I'm fighting for you. And I got you. I got you. And we're going to go down different paths. We're going to take different turns along the way. We're going to mess up. We're going to stumble. There's going to be really hard moments, but I got you.
That was great.
And I don't know if that's the answer of like that one thing, but I think it's cultivating that type of courage.
Yeah. What I heard in all of that, if I was going to summarize it into a really tight, neat ball and frankly, in some way disrespect it because I don't think it can get packed into a tight, neat ball, is that you need to love yourself enough to be able to advocate for yourself when it's hard. And through doing that, you'll learn how to do it for other people when they need it against themselves. Right? Because what I heard from you that was recurring that I really appreciated and that was really inspiring for me was when you talk about getting in touch with yourself and understanding who you are and what you're capable of and what you want, you also spoke to the recognition that your inner self, when you really get into you might not believe that you're worth that. You might not believe that you deserve that. You might not believe that you're capable of that. And there needs to be a second version of you who goes back to that person and says, you don't have to be. I'm here to help you with it. We're going to do this together. And the old you gets to trust the new you. And you get to become a version of yourself you couldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah. I think I don't know if you could say old you, new you. I think there is little you and adult you. And this is where I can go kind of wooey, but a lot of my journey also too, and like healing, it has been a lot of what is reparenting. And there's a lot of different models and things out there, but at the core, like we all have this, I'm going to go there, but this wounded inner child, like we all do, That is the version of us that's like, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I just want to be loved. I just want to be held. Like, that's that 8-year-old girl. And oftentimes, like, we're operating out of that wounded inner child in so many of our things. That is showing up in work. That's like, I don't believe that I'm worthy. I don't think this. And we are operating from that place in so much of our life. So I think part of a lot of this healing journey is being able to show up for that younger version of us at the core and give ourselves what we need in those moments, right? That's that reparenting part for the adult version of ourselves to step on the scene and say, hey, you're okay. Mm-hmm. I got you. You're doing so great. And to be able to give that space of what that little version of you needs. And I think that's what is so healing, and to be able to then step into the life you want, into the work, into your passions, into your healing and everything with this other sense of confidence that you carry. Because we all have both parts of us. Like, every single person who's listening to this has that younger wounded version of them that has that self-doubt, that unworthiness. We all have that. And we also have this other version of ourselves that is also who we are, that says, fuck yeah, I got this. I got you.
Rachel Scheer, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Turn pro. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life Podcast. Please remember, give us a hand, rate it, review it wherever you listen to shows. We are on a mission to humanize the healthcare industry by professionalizing the fitness industry to empower the individual to live a life unlimited by the way that their body looks, feels, or performs. If you are inspired by that mission and want to jump on the wagon, find us anywhere. Active Life Professional on Instagram, Active Life RX on Instagram. Come to me personally at Dr. Sean Pastuch. We want to welcome you onto the train. We want you to be a part of the mission. We want to offer you the opportunity to pursue this right alongside us. We're inspired by your effort, and we hope to help you in your journey. Turn pro.